The morning I discovered our life savings had vanished, I stood in our kitchen holding the bank statement with trembling hands. $47,000. Gone overnight. 7 years of careful budgeting, countless sacrifices, every penny I'd saved from my property management salary, wiped out while I slept. Marcus sat at our breakfast table, calmly buttering his toast as if he hadn't just destroyed our financial future. When I showed him the statement, he didn't even have the decency to look surprised. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Mom needed it for her medical bills, he said, not meeting my eyes. The doctors won't wait, Victoria. You know how sick she's been. But I knew Catherine Hayes better than that. She'd been perfectly healthy when I saw her last week, carrying heavy shopping bags up the stairs to her luxury apartment in Riverside Heights. The same apartment where she'd been living rent-free for 3 years, thanks to what I thought was just good luck with a generous landlord. My name is Victoria Hayes, and I'm 32 years old. What I'm about to tell you is the story of how my husband's family thought they could steal everything from me, not knowing I held the keys to their entire world. This is the story of how sometimes the biggest betrayals lead to the most satisfying revelations. 3 days after discovering the theft, I sat across from Marcus and his family in Catherine's spacious living room at Riverside Heights. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the expensive furniture that somehow a woman on disability benefits could afford. Rachel, Marcus's sister, had called this emergency family meeting to discuss what she dramatically termed our financial crisis. Catherine reclined in her velvet armchair like a queen holding court, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against the armrest. For someone supposedly battling serious health issues, she looked remarkably vibrant. Her silver hair was professionally styled, and her designer outfit probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, though I noticed no actual tears. I never wanted it to come to this, Catherine began, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. But when the doctor said I needed immediate surgery, what choice did we have? I couldn't ask my children to watch their mother die because we couldn't afford treatment. Rachel nodded sympathetically, reaching over to squeeze her mother's hand. Victoria, surely you understand family comes first. Mom has given so much to all of us over the years. The least we can do is help her in her time of need. I sat quietly observing their performance. Rachel had always been the family's designated spokesperson, smooth and persuasive when it served their purpose. She worked as a marketing coordinator at the family's struggling construction company, though her main talent seemed to be manipulating situations to benefit the Hayes clan. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair, still unable to meet my gaze directly. We can build the savings back up, he offered weakly. Business has been picking up lately. The new housing development contract should bring in good money. Should bring in money, I repeated slowly. Like how your mother should have insurance that covers medical procedures. Catherine's dabbing became more vigorous. The insurance company is fighting everything. You know how they are with pre-existing conditions. They're saying the treatment is experimental, not covered under my policy. I pulled out my phone and placed it on the coffee table between us. That's interesting, Catherine. Because I called your insurance company this morning. Turns out your policy would cover the procedure completely, with just a $500 deductible. The room fell silent. Catherine's handkerchief paused mid-dab. Rachel's supportive smile faltered for just a moment, before she recovered. Well, that's wonderful news, Rachel said quickly, but there might be other costs involved. Hospital stays, recovery care, medications, these things add up quickly. $47,000 worth, I asked, keeping my tone conversational. Because that's exactly what was taken from our account. Not $46,000, not $48,000, exactly $47,000. Marcus finally looked at me, confusion creeping across his features. What are you getting at, Victoria? I leaned back in my chair, studying each face in turn. I'm just curious about the precision of that number. Most medical emergencies don't come with such exact price tags. Catherine straightened in her chair, her vulnerability mask slipping slightly. The doctors gave us a comprehensive estimate. We needed to pay up front to secure the surgery date. Which hospital? I asked simply. Portland General, Rachel answered quickly. Too quickly. I nodded thoughtfully. Portland General is excellent. Martinez in their cardiac unit is particularly skilled. I assume that's who you're working with, given your heart condition. Catherine blinked rapidly. Yes, Dr. Martinez is very qualified. He certainly is, I agreed. I should know, I had lunch with him yesterday. Lovely man. We discussed property investments over coffee. He was quite surprised when I mentioned your case, especially since he's been on vacation in Hawaii for the past 2 weeks. The silence stretched like a taut wire. Marcus stared at his mother, pieces of understanding beginning to click into place. Rachel's face had gone pale, her marketing smile completely abandoned. There must be some confusion, Catherine stammered. Perhaps it was a different doctor, or perhaps I interrupted gently. There never was any medical emergency at all. I stood and walked to the large windows overlooking the building's courtyard. The landscaping was immaculate, the amenities clearly expensive to maintain. You know what I find most interesting about this situation? It's not just the lies about the medical bills. It's the time. Marcus leaned forward. What do you mean? Well, I said, turning back to face them. 3 months ago, you asked me to sign some documents. Remember, you said they were just routine updates to our joint accounts, adding some security features. But what they actually did was give you sole authority to make large withdrawals without my signature. Catherine's handkerchief had been forgotten entirely now. Rachel was staring at her hands, no longer maintaining eye contact. Then 2 months ago, I continued, Rachel started asking very specific questions about my work. How much money I made, whether I had any savings accounts Marcus didn't know about, what kind of investments I might have. At the time I thought she was just being friendly, taking an interest in my career. Marcus's frown deepened. Rachel, you never mentioned asking Victoria about her finances. And last month I pressed on. Catherine started making comments about how expensive everything was getting. Her apartment, her lifestyle, how hard it was living on a fixed income. She mentioned several times how worried she was about making ends meet. I returned to my seat, watching as the family's carefully constructed narrative began to crumble. The thing is, I know exactly how much this apartment costs. The rent, the utilities, the parking space and the secure garage. I know because I've been tracking the expenses very carefully. Catherine straightened defensively. The landlord has been very understanding about my situation. We've worked out a special arrangement. Yes, I said softly. You have worked out quite a special arrangement. I reached for my purse, and everyone tensed, waiting for whatever evidence I might produce. Instead, I pulled out a leather portfolio and set it on the table. The Riverside Heights apartment complex. I began opening the portfolio to reveal official documents. Is a premium property in one of Portland's most desirable neighborhoods. Built in 2018, it features luxury amenities, covered parking, and some of the best views in the city. Marcus leaned closer, trying to read the papers. Victoria, what does this have to do with anything? Everything, I replied, spreading the documents across the table, because for the past 4 years, I've been the sole owner of this building. The statement hit the room like a physical blow. Catherine's face drained of all color. Rachel's mouth fell open in shock. Marcus stared at the ownership papers, as if they were written in a foreign language. That's impossible, Catherine whispered. Actually, it's quite possible when you know what you're doing, I explained calmly. I started investing in real estate shortly after we got married. Small properties at first, building up capital and experience. When this building went up for sale 3 years ago, I saw the potential immediately. I pointed to specific documents in the portfolio. The previous owner was facing bankruptcy and needed a quick sale. I was able to purchase it well below market value using a combination of my savings, a business loan and some creative financing. Marcus found his voice. But Mom's been living here for 3 years. She said the landlord was some property management company. Hayes Property Investments. I confirmed. That's my company. Catherine has been living in my building, rent-free, for 3 years. I told her the rent was being waived due to a special assistance program for seniors. Rachel stared at me in horror. You've been lying to us this entire time, have I? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Because I distinctly remember telling Marcus about my property investments several times over the years. He never seemed particularly interested in the detail, and I certainly never lied about owning rental properties. That information was always available if anyone had bothered to ask. Catherine struggled to compose herself. This is all very interesting, Victoria, but it doesn't change the fact that I needed medical help, and my son did what any loving child would do. You're absolutely right, I agreed. And for a moment, hope flickered in her eye. A loving child would help their parent in a genuine medical emergency. But here's what actually happened. I pulled out my phone again, this time opening a voice recording app. 3 weeks ago, I had lunch with Tiffany Rodriguez from Marcus's construction company. We've become quite friendly over the past few months. She mentioned some interesting conversations she'd overheard in the office. Marcus's face went white. Victoria, you can't just record people without I didn't record anything without permission. I interrupt. Tiffany was happy to share what she'd witnessed, especially after I explained the situation. Would you like to hear what she told me about the conversation you had with Rachel in the conference room 3 weeks ago? I pressed play on the recording. Tiffany's clear voice filled the room. Marcus was telling Rachel that their mom was getting desperate about money. She'd been asking him for months to find a way to access Victoria's savings. Rachel said they needed to create some kind of emergency that would justify taking a large amount quickly, before Victoria could ask too many questions or get lawyers involved. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stared at the phone as if it were a snake. Catherine had gone completely still, her performative grief abandoned entirely. Tiffany's recorded voice continued. Then Marcus said his mom had found out that Victoria owned the building where she lives, and they were worried she might start charging rent or even evict Catherine if she discovered they were planning to take money from the joint account. Rachel suggested they take enough to cover several months of rent elsewhere.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
In case Victoria kicked Catherine out, I stopped the recording and looked around the room. So the $47,000 wasn't for medical bills at all. It was supposed to be Catherine's escape fund, in case I found out about her free housing and decided to end the arrangement. Catherine finally found her voice, though it was barely a whisper. You don't understand the pressure I've been under. Living here not knowing when you might decide to throw me out. I needed security. Security, I repeated. You needed security, so you conspired with your children to steal my life savings. Marcus buried his face in his hands. God, Victoria, I'm so sorry. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. How was it supposed to happen? I asked, were you planning to tell me eventually, or was I supposed to just accept that our money had vanished? Rachel finally spoke up, her marketing training kicking in as she tried to salvage the situation. Look, this has gotten completely out of hand. We can return the money. It's sitting in Mom's account right now. We can transfer it back today and pretend this never happened. I stood up again, walking back to the windows. The view really was spectacular from this high. The entire city spread out below, including the other properties I'd been quietly acquiring over the past few years. That's generous of you, Rachel, I said without turning around. But I'm afraid it's not that simple anymore. What do you mean? Catherine asked, a new note of fear creeping into her voice. I turned back to face them, and for the first time since this whole mess began, I allowed myself a small smile. I mean that stealing $47,000 isn't just a family disagreement. It's a felony, and when that theft is combined with conspiracy and fraud, well, the legal ramifications become quite serious. Marcus shot to his feet. You can't be thinking of pressing charges. We're family. Are we? I asked quietly. Because family members don't typically conspire to rob each other blind. Catherine leaned forward in her chair. Victoria, please. We can work this out. I'll not only return the money, I'll pay you back with interest. We can set up a payment plan for the rent I should have been paying all these years. And how exactly would you pay me back? I inquired. You're on a fixed income, remember? Disability benefits that barely cover your basic needs. At least, that's what you've been telling everyone for the past 3 years. Rachel shifted uncomfortably. Mom has some savings, and I can help with payments from my salary. Savings, I mused. That's interesting, because according to the financial disclosure forms Marcus filled out when we applied for our mortgage refinancing last year, his mother had less than $5,000 in total assets, but somehow she's been maintaining a lifestyle that costs at least $4,000 per month, even without paying rent. I returned to the table and opened another section of my portfolio. I've been doing some research over the past few months. It's amazing what you can discover when you start looking closely at financial records. The documents I spread out this time showed bank statements, credit card bills, and purchase records. Catherine, your spending over the past 3 years averages about $60,000 annually. That's quite impressive for someone whose total declared income is $18,000 from Social Security. Catherine's composure finally cracked completely. You've been spying on me, investigating your own family. I've been protecting my investments, I corrected. When I noticed discrepancies in my tenants' lifestyle versus their claimed financial situation, I did what any responsible property owner would do. I investigated. Marcus sank back into his chair. How long have you known about the financial inconsistencies? About 6 months. About your plan to steal from our joint account. About 3 weeks thanks to Tiffany. About the fake medical emergency, the moment Catherine mentioned Portland General and Dr. Martinez. Rachel was staring at me with something approaching awe. You knew all along. This whole meeting, you knew everything we were going to say. Not everything, I admitted. I wasn't entirely sure how committed you all were to maintaining the lie. I thought maybe, if given the chance, someone might tell the truth. Catherine straightened her shoulders, seeming to find some reserve of defiance. Fine, so you caught us. You're very clever, Victoria. But what happens now? Are you going to destroy this family over money? I'm not destroying anything, I replied calmly. You did that when you decided to steal from me. I'm simply dealing with the consequences of your choices. Marcus looked up at me with desperate eyes. What do you want, Victoria? How do we fix this? I gathered my documents back into the portfolio, taking my time to organize everything properly. The silence stretched as they waited for my answer. Here's what's going to happen, I finally said. First, the $47,000 will be returned to our joint account within 24 hours, along with a written apology and a full accounting of how the money was spent. Relief flickered across their faces. But I wasn't finished. Second, Catherine, your free housing arrangement is terminated effective immediately. Market rate rent for your apartment is $3,500 per month, plus utilities and fees. You have 30 days to decide whether you want to sign a lease at market rate, or find alternative housing. Catherine gasped, I can't afford that kind of rent. Then I suggest you start looking for something within your budget, I replied evenly. There are several affordable senior living communities in the Portland area that would be much more suitable for someone on a fixed income. And third, I continued, Rachel, I'll be having a conversation with your employer about the ethics of using company resources and relationships to facilitate personal financial schemes. I believe Hayes Construction has strict policies about conflicts of interest. Rachel went pale. You can't cost me my job over this. I'm not costing you anything, I said. I'm simply ensuring that your employers are aware of how you conduct yourself professionally. What they choose to do with that information is up to them. Marcus stood up again, his voice breaking. Victoria, please. I know we screwed up, but we're still family. Can't we work something out that doesn't destroy everyone? I looked at my husband, really looked at him for the first time since this nightmare began. The man I'd married 7 years ago, who'd promised to love and protect me, who'd just conspired with his family to steal everything I'd worked for. Marcus, I said softly, when you transferred that money out of our account, what exactly did you think would happen? Did you believe I wouldn't notice? Did you think I'd just accept losing everything we'd saved together? He couldn't meet my eyes again. I hoped we could replace it before you found out. The construction contract, if it comes through, I repeated, you gambled our entire financial future on an if. And when I discovered the theft, instead of confessing and apologizing, you and your family constructed an elaborate lie about medical emergencies and insurance companies. Catherine made one last attempt to regain control of the situation. Victoria, I understand you're angry, but I really am facing some health issues. Maybe not as serious as we initially indicated, but there are concerns, and finding a new place to live at my age, with my health problem, your health problems that require no medical treatment and don't prevent you from carrying heavy shopping bags or maintaining an active social life, I asked. Those health problems? She fell silent, finally recognizing that her manipulation tactics were no longer effective. I closed my portfolio and stood to leave. You have 24 hours to return the money and 30 days to make housing arrangements. After that, we'll see what kind of family we actually are. As I walked toward the door, Marcus called after me. Where are you going? I paused at the threshold, looking back at the 3 people who'd just tried to destroy my financial future while living off my generosity for years. I'm going home, I said, to the home I pay for, with the money I earn, surrounded by the investments I've built through my own hard work. And then what? Rachel asked, her voice small and defeated. I allowed myself that small smile again. Then I'm going to call my lawyer and my accountant. We have a lot to discuss. The last thing I saw as I closed the door was Catherine's face, finally understanding that her years of comfortable manipulation were coming to an end. She'd thought she was dealing with the same naive young woman who'd married into their family 7 years ago. She had no idea who I'd become. Walking through the lobby of my own building, I nodded to the doorman who'd been greeting Catherine as a respected resident for 3 years. Soon he'd know exactly who owned the building that provided his paycheck. Outside, the Portland afternoon was crisp and clear. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking up at the building I'd purchased and maintained while its most expensive tenant plotted to steal from me. Sometimes the most satisfying victories are the ones where you win before your opponents even realize the game has begun. But this was just the beginning of Catherine Hayes learning exactly what kind of landlord her daughter-in-law could be. The drive home felt surreal. Everything looked the same. The familiar streets of Southeast Portland, the coffee shops where Marcus and I used to spend lazy Sunday mornings, the park where we'd walked our dog before she passed away last year, but something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't the same person who'd driven to Riverside Heights that afternoon, and I knew I never would be again. My phone buzzed constantly during the 20-minute drive. Text after text from Marcus, each more desperate than the last. "Victoria, please come back. We need to talk about this." Then, "I know you're angry, but we can fix this." Finally, "Don't do anything you'll regret. We're still married." That last message made me laugh out loud, a sound that surprised me with its bitterness. Regret. As if exposing their theft and lies was something I should feel guilty about. I pulled into the driveway of our modest craftsman home in the Richmond neighborhood. Marcus had always loved this house, with its original hardwood floors and vintage fixtures. What he didn't know was that I'd been systematically paying down the mortgage ahead of schedule, using profits from my property investments. We were actually 3 years ahead on payments, something I'd planned to surprise him with on our 10th wedding anniversary. Now that surprise felt like just another way I'd been protecting a man who'd been plotting to rob me. Inside, the house felt different too. The family photos on the mantel seemed to mock me now. There was our wedding day, Marcus looking handsome in his navy suit, me radiant in my grandmother's vintage dress. There we were at last year's Hayes family reunion, everyone gathered around Catherine's birthday cake, smiling like we were the perfect extended family. I walked through each room, seeing everything with new eyes. The kitchen table where Marcus ate breakfast while casually mentioning he'd destroyed our savings. The living room couch where he'd held me just 2 nights ago watching movies and planning our summer vacation. The bedroom where I'd lain awake last night, staring at the ceiling and wondering how I'd missed the signs of his betrayal. My phone rang, Marcus calling for the 4th time since I'd left Riverside Heights. "Victoria, thank God. Where are you?" "I'm at home," I said, settling into the armchair by the front window. "I'm coming over. We need to discuss this rationally." "Actually, Marcus, we don't. You made your choice when you took that money. I'm simply dealing with the consequences." "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," he said, and I could hear traffic in the background. He was already driving toward our house. Mom was panicking about the apartment situation. She'd heard rumors that the building might be sold, that new owners might raise rents or convert to condos. She was terrified of being homeless. "So instead of talking to me about it, you decided to steal from our joint account." "It wasn't stealing," Marcus protested. "It's our money. I'm on the account too." "Money I earned and saved while you were barely contributing to our household expenses," I reminded him. "Money you took without discussion, without my knowledge, based on lies about medical emergencies." Silence stretched between us. Finally, Marcus spoke again, his voice small. "How long have you known about the building? That I owned it?" "Since the day I bought it 4 years ago, that your mother was living there. Since the day she moved in 3 years ago. But you never said anything." I leaned back in the chair, watching a neighbor walk their dog past our front yard. Normal life continuing while mine fell apart. Why would I? She needed a place to live. I had a vacant unit, and it seemed like a kind gesture to family. I never imagined she'd use that generosity as justification for theft. "She doesn't know how to handle money," Marcus said weakly. "She's never been good with finances. She's been spending $60,000 a year while claiming poverty. I count. That takes a certain kind of financial planning, even if it's not the legal kind." I heard his car door slam, meaning he'd reached our house. Within moments I saw him walking up the front path through the window. He looked defeated, his shoulders slumped, his usually confident stride reduced to a shuffle. When he came through the front door, I remained in my chair, watching him with the same clinical detachment I'd felt during the confrontation at his mother's apartment. He stood in our entryway, seeming unsure whether he was welcome in his own home. "Sit down, Marcus," I said finally. "We should talk." He chose the couch, sitting on the edge as if ready to flee. "Victoria, I know how this looks, but you have to understand the pressure I've been under." "Tell me about the pressure." He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I'd once found endearing. "The construction business has been struggling for months. We lost 2 major contracts to companies that underbid us, and Dad's been talking about layoffs. Rachel's job was on the line, and she's got student loans, car payments. The whole family's been stressed about money, and somehow that justified stealing from me. It wasn't meant to be permanent," he insisted. "The West Side development project. If we get that contract, it would be worth $500,000. We could have paid you back with interest." "If," I repeated, the same word you used earlier. "You gambled our entire financial security on a hypothetical construction contract." Marcus looked around our living room as if seeing it for the first time. "You've been planning this, haven't you? The building ownership, the investigation into Mom's finances, even having that woman at my office record conversation." Tiffany Rodriguez volunteered that information because she was concerned about what she'd witnessed. I clarified. "She's worked with your family for 3 years, and she'd never seen behavior like what she observed in that conference room. So you recruited my coworker to spy on me." I stood up, walking to the kitchen to put some distance between us. "I didn't recruit anyone, Marcus. When people see you conspiring to steal from your wife, some of them have consciences that compel them to speak up." He followed me into the kitchen, his voice rising with frustration. "Everything you're saying makes it sound like I'm some kind of criminal mastermind. It wasn't like that. Mom was scared. Rachel was trying to help, and I just wanted to solve everyone's problems. By creating a massive problem for me, we would have told you eventually." I turned to face him directly. "When? After you'd spent the money? After your mother had disappeared to whatever new housing you'd arranged for her? When exactly was I supposed to learn that my life savings had been stolen to fund your family's financial irresponsibility?" Marcus leaned against the kitchen counter, looking more exhausted than I'd ever seen him. "I don't know, Victoria. I don't know when or how. I just knew that Mom was desperate, and you seemed to have everything under control, and it felt like the right thing to do in the moment." "The right thing," I repeated softly. "Marcus, do you hear yourself? You took $47,000 from our account without permission, based on fabricated medical emergencies, to solve problems that didn't actually exist. Mom's financial problems she created by living beyond her means while lying about her circumstances," I pointed out. "Problems she could have solved by getting a job, downsizing her lifestyle, or simply being honest about her situation." We stood there in our kitchen, the space where we'd shared thousands of meals and conversations over 7 years of marriage, and I realized I was looking at a stranger. The man I'd fallen in love with would never have conspired to steal from anyone, least of all his wife. The man I'd married had principles, integrity, and respect for other people's autonomy. "When did you change?" I asked quietly. Marcus looked confused. "What do you mean? The man I married 7 years ago would have been horrified by what you did today. He would have told his mother to get a job if she needed money. He would have discussed financial problems with his wife instead of stealing from her. When did you become someone who thinks theft is acceptable if it's for family?" He stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his expression. Maybe recognition, maybe shame, maybe just the realization that there was no way to justify his actions that would satisfy either of us. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "Maybe it happened gradually. Mom and Rachel, they're very persuasive when they want something. And the construction business, the constant stress about money, watching Dad struggle to keep the company afloat while competitors undercut us at every turn. So you decided to undercut me instead." "That's not how I thought about it." "How did you think about it?" I asked. "Walk me through the logic." "You discovered that your wife owned the building where your mother lives rent-free. Instead of being grateful for that generosity, you decided to steal her savings. What was the reason?" Marcus was quiet for so long I wondered if he was going to answer at all. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "We thought you wouldn't miss it." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Wouldn't miss it. You never talked about money, never seemed worried about finance. The house payments were always on time. We never struggled to pay bills. You never complained about expenses. We thought maybe you had other accounts, other sources of income we didn't know about. So you decided to test that theory by stealing everything I'd saved. We thought if you had more money somewhere else, 47,000 wouldn't be a big deal to you." I stared at my husband in complete disbelief. And if I didn't have other money, if that 47,000 was everything I'd saved over 7 years of working and sacrificing and budgeting carefully, Marcus couldn't meet my eyes. We didn't really think about that scenario. You didn't think about it, I repeat. You stole my life savings without considering what would happen if it was actually important to me. Victoria, please, I know how terrible this sounds now, but at the time we were just focused on solving Mom's immediate problem, her imaginary medical emergency, her housing crisis, he corrected. She really was worried about the building being sold or rents going up. That part was true, so instead of having an honest conversation with me about her concerns, you invented a medical emergency to justify. I walked back into the living room, Marcus trailing behind me. Looking at our wedding photos again, I felt a profound sadness that had nothing to do with anger or betrayal. It was the sadness of watching something precious die, something that could never be revived or repaired. Marcus, I need you to understand something, I said, settling back into my armchair. This isn't just about the money, it's about trust, respect, and honesty. It's about the fact that you've been living in my building for 3 years without knowing it, accepting my generosity while planning to steal from me. I didn't know about the building until 3 weeks ago, but once you found out, instead of being grateful or even just talking to me about it, your first instinct was to figure out how to take advantage of the situation. Marcus sat down heavily on the couch. What do you want me to do, Victoria? How do I fix this? I'm not sure you can, I said honestly. Returning the money is just the beginning. The trust between us, the respect, the partnership I thought we had. I don't know if those things can be rebuilt. Are you talking about divorce? The word hung in the air between us. I'd been married for 7 years, and until this morning, divorce had never seriously crossed my mind. We'd had arguments, disagreements, rough patches like any couple, but I'd always believed we were fundamentally on the same team. I'm talking about the fact that I don't know who you are anymore, I said. The Marcus I married would never have done what you did today, so either you've changed, or I never really knew you at all. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. I love you, Victoria. Whatever else you think about me, that hasn't changed. You have a strange way of showing love, I observed. Most people don't steal from the people they love. It wasn't supposed to hurt you. How could taking my life savings without permission not hurt? We thought, he started, then stopped. I thought we could replace it before you noticed. With money from a construction contract you might not even get. The West Side project is almost certain. Dad's been working on it for months, and we're the top bid. I looked at Marcus with something approaching pity. Do you hear yourself? You're still gambling with my financial security based on business deals that might not happen. My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at the screen and saw it was from Tiffany Rodriguez. Thought you should know, there's a lot of discussion at the office today about the West Side project. Apparently the client is having second thoughts about the timeline. I showed Marcus the message. His face went pale as he read it. That doesn't mean we won't get the contract, he said weakly. No, but it means you would have destroyed our savings for nothing. Even if your plan had worked, even if I'd never discovered the theft, you would have gambled everything on a deal that might not materialize. Marcus stared at the phone screen, and I watched the last of his rationalizations crumble. He'd been telling himself that the theft was justified because he could replace the money quickly. Now even that flimsy justification was falling apart. I'm such an idiot, he whispered. You're not an idiot, Marcus. You're someone who made terrible choices under pressure, but the fact that you made those choices tells me something important about who you are when things get difficult. We sat in silence for several minutes. Outside, the afternoon was moving toward evening. Normal people were coming home from work, starting dinner preparations, settling into their routines with their families. I wondered how many of them had discovered that morning that their spouses were thieves. What happens now? Marcus asked finally. Now you and your family return my money, find your mother new housing, and face the consequences of your choices. And us? Our marriage? I looked at my husband, really looked at him, trying to see past the day's revelations, to the man I'd fallen in love with 7 years ago. But that man seemed like a stranger now, someone I'd idealized rather than truly known. I don't know, Marcus. I honestly don't know. My phone rang again. This time it was Rachel, her voice high and panicked when I answered. Victoria, thank God. Mom is having some kind of breakdown. She's locked herself in her bedroom and won't come out. She keeps saying you're going to have her arrested. Are you at the apartment? Yes, Marcus left right after you did, and Mom just fell apart. She's talking about heart palpitations and chest pain. I think we might need to call an ambulance. I looked at Marcus, who was watching my face intently, trying to read the conversation. Rachel, is your mother actually having medical symptoms? Or is she having a panic attack because her theft scheme fell apart? I don't know the difference. She's saying her chest hurts, and she can't breathe properly. Has she taken any medication? Has she done anything to treat these symptoms? Or is she just dramatic about them? She took some aspirin and she's been lying down, but she won't let me call her doctor. Even in crisis, Catherine was maintaining her pattern of medical manipulation. Rachel, if you genuinely believe your mother is having a medical emergency, call 911. If she's having anxiety because she got caught stealing, that's a different issue entirely. You can't just abandon her like this. She's family. She became family again very quickly once the theft was exposed, I observed. This morning she was conspiring to steal from family. Now she's claiming family loyalty should protect her from consequences. Marcus was gesturing at me, wanting to take the phone. I shook my head. Victoria, please, just come back and talk to her. Help us figure out what to do. Rachel, I've given you very clear instructions. Return the money within 24 hours. And Catherine has 30 days to make housing arrangements. There's nothing to figure out, but she can't afford market rate rent anywhere decent. You know that? Then she should have thought about that before stealing from the person providing her free housing. I heard muffled conversation in the background, then Catherine's voice, weaker than usual but still recognizable. Victoria dear, this is all a terrible misunderstanding. Can we please sit down together as a family and work this out? Catherine, we already sat down as a family. You spent that time lying to me about medical emergencies, while refusing to acknowledge that you've been living in my building rent-free for 3 years. I never asked for charity. No, you just accepted it while plotting to steal from the person providing it. Marcus was making increasingly urgent gestures, clearly wanting to mediate the conversation. I stood up and walked away from him, out of the living room and into our home office. Catherine, let me be very clear about something. I've been generous to you for 3 years. I've provided you with housing worth over $100,000 in rent and utilities. I've maintained the building, covered all repairs and improvements, and never asked you for a penny, and I'm grateful for that. Your gratitude was demonstrated this morning, when you helped your children steal $47,000 from my savings account. Silence from Catherine's end. Then, that money was for my medical expenses. There are no medical expenses. We established that very clearly this afternoon. There could be medical expenses in the future. At my age, health problems are inevitable. I sat down at my desk, looking at the financial files spread across the surface: property management documents, investment portfolios, tax records, evidence of the financial life I'd been building while my husband's family plotted against me. Catherine, here's what's interesting about your situation. You've been living rent-free in a luxury apartment for 3 years. Market rate for that unit is $3,500 per month. Over 3 years, that's $126,000 in free housing. I didn't ask for that calculation, plus utilities, which average about $200 per month in your unit. That's another $7,200. So you've received approximately $133,000 in free benefits from me over the past 3 years. Catherine was quiet, probably doing her own math. This morning you helped steal $47,000 from me, bringing your total benefit to $180,000. And now you're claiming that asking you to pay market rate rent going forward is unreasonable. Victoria, I understand you're upset, but I'm not upset, Catherine. I'm done pretending that your financial irresponsibility is my responsibility. I'm done subsidizing your lifestyle while you plot to steal from me. And I'm done listening to manipulation disguised as medical emergencies. I heard Rachel's voice in the background, then Catherine again. What if I sign a lease? What if I agree to pay some rent? Maybe not full market rate, but something reasonable. The reasonable rent for your unit is $3,500 per month. That's what comparable apartments rent for in that neighborhood. I can't afford that. Then you need to find housing you can afford. Victoria, please. I'm 73 years old. Moving at my age, with my health issues, it's not easy. Your health issues that don't require medical treatment, and don't prevent you from maintaining an active social life. Another silence, then Catherine's voice, smaller now. I made a mistake today. But punishing me with homelessness seems extreme. I'm not punishing you with homelessness. I'm ending a generous housing arrangement that you repaid with theft. There's a difference. Marcus appeared in the doorway of the office, his expression pleading. Victoria, maybe we could work out some kind of payment plan for Mom. Reduced rent while she transitions to something more affordable. I covered the phone. Marcus, your mother just finished stealing our life savings. Now you want me to give her a discount on rent too? She's family. She's a thief, and so are you. The words hung between us, harsh but accurate. Marcus flinched as if I'd slapped him. I returned to the phone conversation. Catherine, you have 30 days to make arrangements. I suggest you use that time wisely, and if I can't find anything affordable, then you'll have learned the same lesson that millions of other people learn every day. Actions have consequences. I hung up before she could respond. Immediately, the phone started ringing again. I turned it off. Marcus sat down in the chair across from my desk. That was harsh, Victoria. Harsh would be having you all arrested for theft. Harsh would be evicting Catherine immediately instead of giving her 30 days. Harsh would be telling everyone in your social circle exactly what kind of people you are. You wouldn't do that. I looked at my husband across the desk where I'd spent countless hours building the financial security he'd destroyed in a single morning. Marcus, 12 hours ago, I wouldn't have believed you'd steal from me. I'm discovering that a lot of things I thought were impossible are actually quite possible. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Are you going to press charges? I don't know yet. That depends on several factors, such as whether the money is returned promptly and completely, such as whether your family takes responsibility for their actions instead of continuing to manipulate and lie, such as whether you show any genuine understanding of what you've done. I know I made a terrible mistake. Do you? Because 10 minutes ago you were still trying to justify the theft as a reasonable response to your mother's housing anxiety. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then, what would it take for you to forgive this? I leaned back in my chair considering the question. What would it take? Complete honesty, genuine remorse, restitution beyond just returning the money, or had the trust between us been damaged beyond repair? I don't know if forgiveness is possible, Mark, but if it is, it would start with you understanding that what you did wasn't just a mistake. It was a betrayal of everything our marriage was supposed to represent. I do understand that. Because earlier today you were still referring to our joint savings as our money that you had a right to take. It is our money. Money I earned and saved while you contributed minimally to our household expenses. I reminded him, money you took without discussion, without my knowledge, based on lies. I'm on the account too. I stared at him in disbelief. Marcus, being on the account doesn't give you the right to steal from it. Marriage isn't a license to take whatever you want from your spouse. He looked genuinely confused by this concept, which told me everything I needed to know about how he viewed our financial partnership. We're married, he said weakly. We're supposed to share everything. Sharing means discussing major financial decisions together. Sharing means honesty about income and expenses. Sharing doesn't mean one person gets to unilaterally decide how to spend the other person's savings. I stood up, gathering the financial documents from my desk. Marcus, I think you should stay somewhere else tonight. This is my house too. Actually, it's primarily my house. I've been paying the majority of the mortgage and all of the accelerated payments. But that's not the point. The point is that I can't look at you right now without thinking about what you did this morning. Marcus stood as well, his movements slow and defeated. Where am I supposed to go? Your family seems very concerned about housing arrangements lately. I'm sure they can figure something out. He walked to the office doorway, then turned back. Victoria, I love you. I know I screwed up. But I love you. Love without trust, respect or honesty isn't really love, Marcus. It's just words. After he left, I sat alone in our house, surrounded by the life we'd built together over 7 years. Every piece of furniture, every photograph, every small domestic detail reminded me of shared experiences, shared dreams, shared plans that now felt hollow. But underneath the sadness and betrayal, I felt something else: relief. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I could see clearly. The financial stress Marcus had been claiming, the family pressures, the construction business struggles, none of those things justified theft. But they explained the environment that had made theft seem acceptable to him. I'd been married to someone who, under pressure, would steal from his wife rather than have difficult conversations about money. I'd been supporting a family who saw my generosity as weakness, and my success as something they were entitled to share. Now I knew exactly who they were. And more importantly, I was beginning to understand who I was. Someone strong enough to build financial independence, smart enough to protect myself, and resilient enough to survive betrayal. The phone calls and text messages would continue, the manipulation and guilt trips would escalate. The Hayes family would try every tactic they could think of to avoid the consequences of their actions. But I wasn't the same person they'd tried to steal from that morning. I was someone who owned apartment buildings, who had lawyers and accountants, who understood exactly what theft looked like and what justice required. They'd awakened something in me that they were definitely not prepared to deal with. 3 days later, I sat in the conference room of Morrison and Associates, watching James Morrison review the documents I'd brought him. The law office occupied the top floor of a downtown Portland high-rise, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a commanding view of the city. From this height I could see the Riverside Heights building, where Catherine was probably pacing her apartment, finally understanding that her comfortable arrangement was coming to an end. James was exactly what I'd hoped for in a lawyer: methodical, experienced, and completely unimpressed by family drama masquerading as legal justification. He'd spent the past hour examining bank records, property documents, and the recorded conversation Tiffany had provided, occasionally making notes in his precise handwriting. "This is quite straightforward," he said finally, setting down the last: "unauthorized raise withdrawal of marital funds, conspiracy to commit theft, and arguably fraud given the fabricated medical emergency. The recording alone would be sufficient evidence for criminal charges." "What about the property situation?" I asked, even more clear-cut. "You've provided housing worth approximately $42,000 annually to your mother-in-law for 3 years. That's $126,000 in unreported income that she's failed to declare. The IRS would be very interested in that information." I hadn't considered the tax implications until James mentioned them. Catherine had been receiving substantial financial benefits without reporting them as income, which created an entirely separate set of legal problems for her. However, James continued, pursuing criminal charges against family members can be complicated. Courts prefer to see attempts at resolution before moving to prosecution. Have they made any effort to return the funds? My phone buzzed with another text from Mark. Over the past 3 days, I'd received dozens of messages from various members of his family, each more desperate than the last. This one read, "Mom transferred the money back. Can we please talk now?" I showed James the message. "They returned the money yesterday, but only after I made it clear that criminal charges were the alternative." And the housing situation. Catherine has been calling me every few hours, alternating between medical emergencies, emotional breakdowns, and threats to expose family secrets that don't actually exist. Rachel has offered to co-sign a lease, despite the fact that she's drowning in debt herself. James nodded thoughtfully. "Classic desperation tactics. They're hoping to wear you down with persistence and manufactured crises. The question is, what outcome are you seeking here?" I looked out the window at the city below, thinking about what I actually wanted. Revenge? Justice? Protection? All three seemed reasonable given the circumstances. "I want them to understand that actions have consequences," I said finally. "I want Catherine out of my building, and paying her own way. I want Marcus to understand that marriage doesn't give him the right to steal from me. And I want assurance that nothing like this will happen again." Those are reasonable goals. Let's discuss strategy. James outlined several approaches, from formal demand letters to civil litigation to criminal referral. The most effective strategy, he suggested, would be a combination: formal legal documentation of their obligations, clear consequences for non-compliance, and the threat of prosecution held in reserve. "We'll draft a comprehensive settlement agreement," he explained. "It will specify the terms of Mrs. Hayes Sr.'s departure from your property, establish payment schedules for any outstanding obligations, and include non-disclosure provisions to prevent further harassment or manipulation." "What about Marcus? Your husband's situation is more complex because of the marital relationship. We'll need to address the unauthorized withdrawal separately, probably through a post-nuptial agreement that clarifies financial boundaries and consequences for future violation." As James spoke, I felt a clarity I hadn't experienced since this nightmare began. Having legal structure around the situation made it feel manageable rather than overwhelming. The Hayes family's emotional manipulation tactics would be much less effective when confronted with formal legal documents and specific consequences. My phone rang. "Tiffany Rodriguez. Victoria, I hope I'm not bothering you, but I thought you should know what's happening at the office." "What kind of things?" "Well, Marcus has been distracted and irritable all week. He snapped at 2 clients yesterday over minor issues, and this morning he got into a shouting match with his father about the West Side project." I walked to the window, putting some distance between myself and James, so I could focus on the conversation. "What about the West Side project?" "That's the interesting part. Apparently, the client decided to go with a different contract. Something about concerns over Hayes Construction's financial stability and recent management decisions. Marcus is blaming everyone except himself, and the tension in the office is getting pretty uncomfortable. The irony was almost poetic. Marcus had stolen our money to solve his family's financial problems, and in doing so, he'd created the exact kind of instability that cost them the contract they'd been counting on to justify the theft. There's something else, Tiffany continued. Rachel has been making calls to other family members, trying to get them to pressure you into being reasonable about the housing situation. She's telling people that you're trying to make Catherine homeless out of spite. Other family members, Marcus's aunts and uncles, some cousins, even his grandmother. Rachel's painting herself as the reasonable mediator trying to save the family from your vindictive revenge. I thanked Tiffany and hung up, returning to my seat across from Jane. It seems the Hayes family is escalating their manipulation campaign. They're recruiting extended family members to pressure me. James didn't look surprised. That's common in these situations. When legal tactics fail, people often resort to social pressure and emotional blackmail. We should anticipate contact from various relatives asking you to think about the family or be the bigger person. And my response should be, refer them to this office. Once we have formal legal documentation in place, all communication about this matter should go through me. It will eliminate their ability to manipulate you emotionally and ensure everything is properly documented. We spent the next hour crafting the formal settlement term. Catherine would have 30 days to vacate the apartment, with the option to sign a lease at market rate if she preferred to stay. Any outstanding utilities or damages would be her responsibility. She would provide a written acknowledgement of the housing benefits she'd received, and agree not to make any further financial claims against me. For Marcus, the post-nuptial agreement would establish separate financial accounts, require written consent for any transactions over $500, and specify that any future unauthorized withdrawals would result in immediate divorce proceedings and criminal prosecution. These terms are firm but fair, James explained as we reviewed the final drafts. They protect your interests while giving the Hayes family clear options for compliance. If they choose not to cooperate, we have strong grounds for more aggressive action. As I left the law office, I felt a sense of empowerment I hadn't experienced in years. The Hayes family had been operating on the assumption that I was naive, trusting, and easily manipulated. They'd built their theft scheme around the belief that I would prioritize family harmony over personal justice. They were about to learn how wrong they'd been. My phone started ringing the moment I reached the parking garage. Catherine, of course. Victoria, dear, I've been trying to reach you for days. We really need to discuss this housing situation. Catherine, all communication about legal matters needs to go through my attorney now, James Morrison at Morrison & Associates. His office will be contacting you with formal documentation of your options. Legal matters. Victoria, this is family business, not some corporate transaction. Family business was when I provided you with free housing for 3 years. The moment you conspired to steal from me, it became a legal matter. I've returned the money. You've returned money you stole after being caught. That doesn't erase the theft, Catherine. I could hear her breathing heavily on the other end of the line. Victoria, I'm an old woman. I made a mistake, but I don't deserve to be thrown out on the street over it. You're not being thrown out on the street. You're being given 30 days to make housing arrangements like any other tenant who's been served notice. But I can't afford anything comparable to this apartment. Then you'll need to find something within your actual budget instead of living beyond your means at my expense. Catherine's voice took on the familiar manipulative tone I'd heard countless times over the years. You know, Victoria, Marcus is family. He'll always be family. But you're just someone he married. Family bonds last forever, but marriages can end. The threat was subtle but clear. Continue pursuing this course, and they would work to destroy my marriage to protect themselves. Catherine, are you suggesting that your family will try to sabotage my marriage if I don't let you continue living in my building rent-free? I'm just saying that family relationships are complicated, and sometimes people have to choose sides. I almost laughed at the transparent manipulation. You're right that people have to choose sides. Marcus already chose his side when he stole from me to benefit you. Now I'm choosing mine. Don't you care about your marriage at all? My marriage to a man who conspires with his mother to steal from his wife. I'm beginning to question what exactly I'd be trying to save. I hung up before Catherine could respond and immediately called James Morrison. They're escalating the emotional manipulation, I reported. Catherine just threatened to destroy my marriage if I don't back down on the housing issue. Document everything, James advised. Save all voicemails, text messages, and keep a record of any contact from family members. If they continue this pattern of harassment, we can seek a restraining order. The next morning brought a new task. My doorbell rang at 7 a.m., and I opened it to find Eleanor Hayes, Marcus's grandmother, standing on my front porch. She was a tiny woman in her 80s, impeccably dressed and leaning heavily on an ornate walking cane. "Eleanor," I said, surprised, "what are you doing here so early?" "May I come in, dear? I'd like to discuss this family situation." I led her into the living room, noting how she moved carefully, but without the dramatic frailty I'd expected, given Rachel's recruitment campaign. Eleanor had always been the family matriarch, the one everyone deferred to on important matters. "Victoria, I've heard about the troubles between you and Catherine," she began, settling into the armchair I'd occupied during my confrontation with Marcus 3 days earlier. "I wanted to speak with you directly, woman to woman." "I appreciate that, Eleanor, but this isn't really a family matter anymore. It's a legal issue involving theft and fraud." Eleanor waved her hand dismissively. "Legal issues, family issues. At our age, dear, they're all just different ways of working out problems between people who care about each other. Catherine and Marcus cared enough about me to steal $47,000 from our savings account." "Catherine is impulsive and frightened," Eleanor said, her voice taking on a tone of gentle reason. "She's never been good with money, and the idea of losing her apartment terrified her into making poor decisions. But that doesn't mean she's a bad person." I sat down across from Eleanor, studying the woman who'd raised Marcus and his siblings after their parents divorced. She'd always seemed wise and fair, the stable center of a chaotic family, but now I wondered if she was just a more sophisticated manipulator than the other. "Eleanor, are you aware that Catherine has been living in my building rent-free for 3 years? Rachel mentioned something about a housing arrangement." "Yes, are you aware that over those 3 years, I've provided Catherine with over $100,000 in free rent and utility?" Eleanor's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's quite generous, dear. Are you aware that Catherine repaid that generosity by helping my husband steal our entire savings account?" "I'm aware that there was some confusion about medical expenses and family emergency fund." I leaned forward in my chair. "Eleanor, there was no confusion. There was no medical emergency. Catherine, Marcus and Rachel conspired to fabricate a health crisis to justify stealing money from me. When I caught them, they maintained the lie even when confronted with evidence." Eleanor was quiet for a moment, her sharp eyes studying my face. "And you're certain there was no medical issue?" "I'm certain that Catherine's claimed heart problems don't exist, that her supposed doctor has been on vacation in Hawaii for 2 weeks, and that her insurance would have covered any legitimate procedures with just a $500 deductible." I see. Eleanor's tone remained neutral, but I could see her processing this information. "That does change things somewhat, does it? Because Rachel told me you were very concerned about Catherine's potential homelessness and my unreasonable demands for rent payment. Rachel told me that Catherine was having health problems, and you were evicting her during a medical crisis," Eleanor admitted. "If that's not accurate, it's not just inaccurate, Eleanor. It's a complete fabrication designed to make me look heartless while covering up theft." Eleanor sat back in her chair, looking older than when she'd arrived. "Victoria, I've known this family for 83 years. I've seen 3 generations grow up, marry, have children, face challenges, and I've learned that sometimes good people make terrible decisions when they're scared. And sometimes people who seem good are actually just better at hiding their selfishness," I countered. "You think Catherine is fundamentally selfish?" "I think Catherine is someone who spent 3 years accepting generous treatment from me while planning to steal from me the moment she felt threatened. I think that reveals her fundamental character quite clearly." Eleanor nodded slowly. "And Mark, what does his participation in this scheme tell you about his character?" The question cut deeper than I'd expected. Marcus's betrayal hurt in a way that Catherine's manipulation didn't, because I'd trusted him completely while always maintaining some emotional distance from his mother. "I think Marcus chose his mother's financial comfort over his wife's financial security," I said finally. "I think he was willing to destroy our marriage to solve his family's problems, and I think that tells me everything I need to know about his priorities. Marriage is complicated, dear. Sometimes people make choices they regret when they feel pulled between competing loyalties." "Eleanor, there shouldn't have been competing loyalties. Marcus's first loyalty should have been to his wife, not to his mother's scheme to avoid paying rent." Eleanor stood up slowly, using her cane for support. "What would it take for you to forgive this situation, Victoria? What would need to happen for this family to heal?" "Healing would require honesty, accountability, and genuine changes in behavior." So far I've seen continued lying, manipulation, and attempts to recruit family members to pressure me into accepting theft as normal family business. And if they provided those things, honesty, accountability, behavioral changes. I walked Eleanor to the front door, considering her question. What would it take for me to trust the Hayes family again? Could trust even be rebuilt after such a fundamental betrayal? I don't know, Eleanor. I honestly don't know if the damage can be repaired. After she left, I realized that the family recruitment campaign was more sophisticated than I'd initially understood. Rather than sending obviously biased family members to pressure me, they'd sent Eleanor, the one person in the family I genuinely respected, whose opinion might actually influence my decisions. But even Eleanor's intervention felt calculated now. Had she come to my house out of genuine concern for family harmony, or because Rachel had convinced her that emotional manipulation from a trusted family member might succeed where other tactics had failed? My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Grandma Eleanor said she talked to you. I know she helped you understand our perspective. Can we please sit down together and work this out? The message confirmed my suspicions. Eleanor's visit hadn't been a spontaneous gesture of concern. It had been part of the family's coordinated campaign to avoid consequences for their theft. I called James Morrison immediately. They sent Marcus's grandmother to my house this morning, I reported. She presented herself as a neutral mediator, but it was clearly coordinated with the rest of the family's pressure campaign. How do you know it was coordinated? Marcus texted me immediately afterward, referencing her visit and assuming she'd convinced me to understand their perspective. It was obviously planned. James sighed. I'll accelerate the timeline for serving the formal legal document. The longer this drags on, the more aggressive their manipulation tactics will become. We need to establish clear legal boundaries before they escalate further. What kind of escalation should I expect? In my experience, when emotional manipulation fails, people often resort to more desperate measures. They might try to turn mutual friends against you, spread rumors about your character, or even attempt some form of retaliation against your business interests. I hadn't considered that they might try to damage my property management business, or interfere with my other investments. The Hayes family knew enough about my professional activities to cause real problems if they chose to. Should I be concerned about sabotage? I'd recommend documenting your current business relationships and financial position carefully, James advised. If they do attempt retaliation, we'll want clear evidence of what was damaged and when. That afternoon, I drove to Riverside Heights to inspect the property and speak with the building management team. As the owner, I needed to ensure that Catherine's departure would be handled professionally and that any damage to the unit would be properly documented. The building manager, Sandra Kim, met me in the lobby. She'd been managing the property since I'd purchased it, but our interactions had always been through my property management company rather than directly. Ms. Hayes, I wanted to update you on the situation with Ms. Catherine Hayes in Unit 4B. Sandra began as we rode the elevator up to Catherine's floor. What kind of situation? She's been very distressed since receiving the notice to vacate. Yesterday she called the office 6 times asking about payment plans, lease modifications, hardship exemption. This morning she came down to the office, claiming she was having chest pains and asking us to call an ambulance. Did you call an ambulance? We offered to, but she said she just needed to sit down and have some water. After about 20 minutes, she seemed fine and went back to her apartment. But it was concerning behavior. We reached Catherine's floor, and Sandra led me down the hallway toward Unit 4B. As we approached, I could hear raised voices coming from inside the apartment. That sounds like Marcus and Rachel, I observed. Sandra nodded. They've been here every day since the notice was served. Yesterday they were here for 4 hours, and we received noise complaints from other tenants. Through the door I could hear Catherine's voice. She owns the building, Marcus.
Your wife owns this entire building. How did you not know that your wife owned the building where your mother lives? Marcus's response was muffled, but his tone was clearly defensive. Rachel's voice came through more clearly. We need to find something we can use against her. Some violation of landlord-tenant law, some discrimination issue, something that gives us leverage. They're discussing legal retaliation, Sandra observed quietly. Are they violating any building policies with these extended visits and noise levels? The lease specifies that guests can't stay more than 3 consecutive nights without being added to the lease, Sandra confirmed. And the noise complaints are documented violations. I made a mental note to have James add lease violations to the formal eviction proceedings. The Hayes family was providing plenty of additional legal ammunition for their own destruction. Sandra, I want security cameras installed in the hallways on this floor. I decided. If they're planning retaliation or harassment, we need documentation. I'll arrange that today. As we walked back toward the elevator, my phone rang, an unknown number, but I answered anyway. Victoria, this is Tom Hayes, Marcus's uncle. I was hoping we could talk about this family situation. Another recruited family member. Tom, all legal matters are being handled by my attorney now, James Morrison at Morrison and Associates. This isn't a legal matter, Victoria. This is about family, about forgiveness and working together to solve problems. The problem was solved when Catherine and Marcus stopped stealing from me. Everything else is just dealing with consequences. Come on, Victoria. Catherine's an old lady who made a mistake. Do you really want to destroy her over money? I'm not destroying anyone. I'm simply ending a generous housing arrangement that was repaid with theft and conspiracy. Look, we're family. We take care of each other. That means sometimes we overlook mistakes and focus on what's best for everyone. I stepped into the elevator, noting that Tom's definition of what's best for everyone seemed to mean what's most convenient for Catherine. Tom, when Catherine was stealing from me, was that her way of taking care of family? She was scared about her housing situation, so scared that she fabricated medical emergencies and conspired with my husband to commit theft rather than having an honest conversation with me about her concerns. She didn't know how to approach you about it. She could have started with "thank you for 3 years of free housing" and continued with "I'm worried about my future here." Instead, she chose theft and lies. Tom's voice took on a harder edge. Victoria, you're being unreasonable. This vendetta against Catherine is tearing the family apart. I'm not conducting a vendetta. I'm a landlord dealing with a tenant who conspired to steal from me. The fact that the tenant happens to be related to my husband doesn't change the legal and ethical issues involved. Family should mean something. It should mean honesty, respect, and mutual support. Catherine's version of family seems to mean theft, lies, and emotional manipulation. I hung up and called James Morrison for the 3rd time that day. They're definitely coordinating a family pressure campaign, I reported. Marcus's uncle just called with the same talking points I heard from his grandmother this morning. And I overheard Catherine, Marcus, and Rachel discussing legal retaliation while I was inspecting the building. We need to serve those documents today, James decided. I'll have a process server deliver them this afternoon. Once they're served, any further harassment can be addressed through the courts. What should I expect once they receive formal legal notice? Either complete capitulation or complete escalation, James said grimly. People like this rarely choose middle ground when confronted with serious consequences. As I drove home from Riverside Heights, I reflected on how completely the Hayes family had misread both the situation and my character. They'd assumed I was weak because I'd been generous. They'd assumed I was naive because I'd been trusted. The Hayes family was about to learn the difference between those things, and the education was going to be expensive. The formal legal documents were served at 4:30 on a Friday afternoon, precisely when James Morrison had calculated they would have maximum psychological impact. People tend to panic more when they receive legal papers right before a weekend, he'd explained, when lawyer offices are closed and they can't immediately seek counsel. I was at my property management office downtown when my phone started exploding with calls and messages. Marcus first, his voice high and strained. Victoria, what the hell is this? A process server just handed me papers at the construction site in front of my entire crew. This is humiliating. Then Catherine, her voice shaking with what sounded like genuine fear. Victoria, dear, I don't understand these legal documents. They're saying I have to pay back rent and utilities? This must be some kind of mistake. Rachel left a voicemail that was pure fury. You've crossed a line, Victoria. Serving legal papers like we're strangers? Like we haven't been family for 7 years? This is vindictive and cruel. I listened to each message with a sense of satisfaction that surprised me. For months, maybe years, I'd absorbed their subtle manipulations, their assumptions about my naivety, their casual disregard for my contributions to their comfortable lives. Now they were finally understanding that actions have consequences. Tiffany Rodriguez called around 5:30, her voice bubbling with barely contained excitement. Victoria, you should see the chaos over here. Marcus came back to the office with these legal papers, and everyone could tell something major had happened. His father pulled him into the conference room, and they've been shouting at each other for an hour. What kind of shouting? George is furious about the potential damage to the company's reputation. Apparently, having your son served with legal papers at a construction site doesn't project stability to clients. Marcus keeps insisting that you're being unreasonable.
And George keeps telling him that stealing from your wife is what's unreasonable. I could picture the scene perfectly. George Hayes had built the construction company over 30 years, maintaining a reputation for reliability and professionalism. Having his son's marital problems spill over into public legal drama would threaten everything he'd worked to establish. There's more, Tiffany continued. Rachel got a call from the company's insurance carrier. Apparently, they do background checks on key employees. And having theft allegations in the family could affect their coverage rates. Theft allegations? The legal documents mention unauthorized financial transfers and conspiracy. Insurance companies get nervous about that kind of language, especially when it involves company officers. I hadn't considered how the legal proceedings might impact Hayes Construction's business relationships, but it made perfect sense. Companies that handle large construction contracts need bonding and insurance, and both require clean background checks for key personnel. Tiffany, are you comfortable staying at Hayes Construction with all this drama? Actually, I've been thinking about making a change anyway. This situation just confirms that the Hayes family has some serious integrity issues. I don't want to be associated with people who think theft is acceptable family business. After we hung up, I sat in my office reviewing the day's property management report. The business I'd built over the past 5 years was thriving, with 12 rental properties generating steady income and excellent tenant relationships. None of those tenants had ever stolen from me, lied about medical emergencies, or recruited family members to pressure me into accepting theft. It occurred to me that I'd been more naive about my husband's family than about any business relationship I'd ever managed. I would never have tolerated from a tenant what I'd accepted from Catherine. I would never have ignored red flags from a contractor that I'd overlooked from Mark. My personal phone rang, a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was local. Victoria, this is Patricia Westbrook. I'm Catherine's sister. I was hoping we could discuss this legal situation. Another family member entering the campaign. Patricia, all legal matters are being handled through my attorney's office now. I understand you're upset, but serving Catherine with legal papers seems extreme. She's told me about her health problems and the financial stress she's been under. What health problems specifically did Catherine mention? Heart issues, I believe. She said she needed surgery but couldn't afford it, and that's why the family had to help with medical expenses. Patricia, Catherine doesn't have heart problems. There was no surgery. The medical emergency was completely fabricated to justify stealing from my savings account. Silence on the other end. Then, that can't be right. Catherine wouldn't lie about something like that. Catherine has been lying about a lot of things. She's been living in my apartment building rent-free for 3 years, while telling everyone she was struggling to pay rent. She's been spending $60,000 annually, while claiming to live on $18,000 in Social Security benefits. I don't understand. If you own the building where she lives, why is this a problem? Can't you just work out a family arrangement? We had a family arrangement. Patricia, I provided Catherine with free housing for 3 years. She repaid that generosity by conspiring with my husband to steal our entire savings account. But surely there's some misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding was mine, thinking that treating Catherine like family would result in her treating me like family in return. I ended the call and immediately received a text from Marcus. Patricia called me crying. She says you told her mom lied about heart problems. This has to stop, Victoria. You're destroying the whole family over money. The text perfectly encapsulated everything wrong with Marcus's thinking. In his mind, I was destroying the family over money, rather than the family having destroyed itself through theft and lies. He genuinely couldn't see that his actions had created this situation. I replied, the family destroyed itself when it chose theft over honesty. I'm simply dealing with the consequences. Marcus responded immediately. We returned the money. What more do you want? Accountability, acknowledgement, assurance that nothing like this will ever happen again. I've apologized. Mom's apologized. Rachel's apologized. What kind of assurance do you need? The kind that comes with legal documentation and binding agreements. You want to legally bind your own family? I want to legally protect myself from people who've already proven they'll steal from me. Marcus didn't respond to that message, probably because there was no reasonable response. You can't argue that legal protection is unnecessary while simultaneously demonstrating exactly why legal protection is essential. Saturday morning brought a new development. I was having coffee on my back deck when my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, came over to chat.
She was in her 70s, retired, and kept a close eye on neighborhood activities. Victoria, dear, I hope you don't mind me asking, but has everything been all right with you and Mark? I've noticed he hasn't been home much this week. We're having some difficulties right now, Mrs. Chen. I only ask because yesterday afternoon there were several cars in your driveway, and I heard raised voices. I was concerned about your safety. Several cars, raised voice. I'd been at my office all day Friday. Mrs. Chen, what time was this? Around 3 o'clock. There was Marcus's truck, a silver sedan and a blue SUV. The voices were coming from your backyard, like people were arguing near your back door. Did you see who was involved? I saw Marcus, and a woman with dark hair, and an older woman with silver hair. They seemed quite agitated about something. Marcus, Rachel and Catherine had been at my house while I was at work, apparently having some kind of family meeting in my backyard. The violation felt almost as serious as the theft itself. They'd used my property for their conspiracy planning without my knowledge or permission. I called James Morrison, even though it was Saturday morning. They were on my property yesterday without my knowledge. I report, my neighbor heard arguing in my backyard and saw 3 family members there while I was at work. That's trespassing, James said immediately. Do you have security cameras on the property? No, but I can install them today. Do that immediately. Also, change your locks in case Marcus made copies of keys for other family members. We'll add the trespassing to our documentation, and if it happens again we can seek a restraining order. Should I confront Marcus about it? Not directly. Let me handle it through formal channel. Any communication about legal violations should be documented officially rather than discussed casually. I spent Saturday afternoon at Home Depot, purchasing security cameras and new locks for my house. The sales associate was helpful and professional, treating the home security upgrade as a routine project rather than the desperate protective measure it actually was. While installing the cameras, I thought about how much my life had changed in just 1 week. 7 days ago, I'd been married to someone I trusted completely, living in a house where I felt secure, managing properties that provided steady income and personal satisfaction. Now I was installing security cameras to protect myself from my own husband's family, and changing locks to keep out people who'd been welcome in my home for years. But underneath the sadness and disruption, I felt something else. I was handling this crisis with competence and strategic thinking. I was protecting my interests and enforcing appropriate boundaries. I was discovering capabilities I hadn't known I possessed. My phone rang while I was programming the security system. Eleanor Hayes again. Victoria, dear, I've heard about the legal papers. This seems like a very dramatic escalation over what was essentially a family misunderstanding. Eleanor, there was no family misunderstanding. There was theft, fraud, and conspiracy. Those are criminal acts, not communication problems. I've spoken with Catherine and she's quite distressed about these financial demands. She says you're asking for back rent on an apartment she thought was provided as family assistance. Family assistance that she repaid with theft. But surely the legal system isn't the appropriate venue for resolving family conflicts. I paused in my camera installation, considering Eleanor's words. She was right that legal systems aren't ideal for family disputes, but that assumed both parties were operating in good faith. When one party chooses theft and lies, legal intervention becomes necessary. Eleanor, what would you have done if someone stole $47,000 from you? If it were family, I would have handled it within the family. How? By accepting the theft, by pretending it didn't happen, by continuing to provide free housing to someone who'd conspired to rob me, by finding a solution that preserved family relationships while addressing the underlying problems. What solution would you suggest that addresses theft while preserving relationships with thieves? Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Perhaps Catherine could pay back the money gradually, and you could work out a reduced rent arrangement for the apartment. So Catherine steals from me, and my response should be to give her a discount on rent. Sometimes maintaining family harmony requires compromise from everyone involved. Eleanor, I compromised for 3 years by providing free housing. I compromised by not pressing charges immediately when I discovered the theft. How much more compromise do you think the victim of theft should make? You're not just a victim, Victoria. Your family and family members have responsibilities to each other that go beyond legal obligations. I finished installing the last camera and stepped back to admire my work. The house was now protected by a comprehensive security system that would document any future trespassing or harassment attempts. Eleanor, You're absolutely right that family members have responsibilities to each other. That's exactly why Marcus shouldn't have stolen from me, and why Catherine shouldn't have conspired to defraud me. But now that it's happened, what's the best way forward for everyone? The best way forward is for everyone to accept responsibility for their actions and face appropriate consequences. Catherine finds housing she can actually afford. Marcus rebuilds trust through demonstrated changes in behavior. The family stops manipulating and starts acknowledging reality. And if they can't do those things, then they'll face legal consequences instead of family consequences. Their choice, Eleanor sighed. Victoria, I've known Marcus since he was born. He's a good man who made poor decisions under pressure. Don't you think 7 years of marriage deserves some consideration? 7 years of marriage deserves honesty, loyalty, and respect. Marcus chose to give those things to his mother instead of his wife. Marriage counseling might help. Professional mediation could provide a neutral space for working through these issues. I considered Eleanor's suggestion. Marriage counseling assumed both parties wanted to save the marriage and were willing to work honestly toward that goal. But Marcus had shown no genuine acknowledgement of his betrayal, no understanding of why theft wasn't acceptable, and no commitment to preventing future violations of trust. Eleanor, marriage counseling works when both people are committed to honesty and change. Marcus is still defending his decision to steal from me. He's still claiming it was justified by his mother's fake medical emergency. He's not ready for counseling because he's not ready to accept that what he did was wrong. He knows it was wrong, he's just struggling with how to avoid consequences for it. I corrected. There's a difference. Sunday morning brought an unexpected visitor. I was reviewing property management reports over coffee when the doorbell rang. Through the new security camera monitor, I saw George Hayes standing on my front porch, looking uncomfortable and older than I remember. George had always been the most reasonable member of the Hayes family, focused on business success and community reputation, rather than family drama and manipulation. If anyone could have an honest conversation about this situation, it would be him. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. George, this is a surprise. Victoria, I was hoping we could talk about the legal situation, about Marcus, about what happened with the money. All legal matters are being handled through my attorney now. This isn't about legal matters. This is about my son's marriage and my family's reputation. I studied George's face, looking for signs of the manipulation tactics his family had been employing all week. Instead, I saw genuine distress and what might have been embarrassment. What did you want to discuss? May I come? I led him into the living room, the same space where I'd confronted Marcus a week earlier about the theft. George sat on the edge of the couch, his hands clasped, looking like a man carrying a heavy burden. Victoria, I want you to know that I knew nothing about what Marcus and Catherine planned. If I had known, I would have stopped it immediately. I believe that, George. The construction business, we've worked 30 years to build a reputation for integrity and reliability. What Marcus did, it threatens everything we've built. I'm sorry this is affecting the business. That's not why I'm here, George said quickly. I'm here because what my son did to you was wrong, and no one else in this family seems willing to say that clearly. The statement surprised me. All week, I'd heard justifications, manipulations, and excuses from the Hayes family. George was the first person to acknowledge the fundamental wrongness of their actions. Thank you for saying that. Marcus is my son, and I love him, but he's also a man who stole from his wife. And that's unacceptable behavior regardless of his motivation. George stood up and walked to the front window, looking out at the street where he'd taught Marcus to ride a bicycle 25 years earlier. Catherine has always been manipulative, and Marcus has always been susceptible to her manipulation. But he's an adult. He's married and his first loyalty should be to you, not to his mother's schemes. Does Marcus understand that? Marcus understands that his actions have consequences he didn't anticipate. Whether he understands that his actions were fundamentally wrong, I'm not certain. George turned back to face me. Victoria, I know you've served legal papers, and I know you have every right to pursue this through the courts. But I'm asking, as his father, if there's any way to resolve this without destroying what's left of this family. What kind of resolution would you suggest? Complete financial restitution, including compensation for the housing Catherine received, formal acknowledgement of wrongdoing, binding agreements to prevent future violations, and genuine changes in behavior, not just promise. George's proposal was remarkably similar to what I'd discussed with James Morrison, But hearing it from Marcus's father carried different weight. It suggested that at least one member of the Hayes family understood the seriousness of the situation. And if Marcus and Catherine refuse those terms, then they'll face whatever consequences their choices have created. George said firmly, "I won't protect my adult children from the results of their own decisions." What about the extended family pressure campaign? The calls from aunts and uncles asking me to be reasonable. George's expression darkened. That was Rachel's idea. She's been calling everyone in the family, presenting a version of events that makes Catherine look like a victim, and you look vindictive. And you allowed this. I stopped at the moment I learned what actually happened. Eleanor, Patricia, Tom, they've all been given accurate information about the theft and fraud. Whether they choose to believe it is up to them. I walked George to the front door, appreciating his directness and accountability even while recognizing that it might be too little too late. The damage to trust and family relationships had been building for years, and one honest conversation couldn't repair everything that had been broken. George, I appreciate your honesty, but you should know that this situation has revealed fundamental problems with Marcus's character and judgment. Even if we resolve the legal issues, I'm not sure our marriage can survive what I've learned about who he really is. I understand. And Victoria, yes, whatever you decide about Marcus, you deserve better than what he gave you. Don't let anyone in this family convince you otherwise. That evening, I reviewed the security camera footage from the past 24 hours. The system had captured 3 different cars driving slowly past my house, occupants clearly examining the property. One car had parked across the street for nearly an hour, with someone inside taking what appeared to be photographs. I called James Morrison to report the surveillance activity. They're documenting your property and routines, he confirmed, probably looking for evidence they can use to claim you're living beyond your means or hiding assets. What kind of evidence would they be looking for? Expensive cars, evidence of recent improvements, visitors who might indicate undisclosed income source. They're trying to build a case that you're financially better off than you've claimed, and therefore shouldn't need the money they stole. Even though they've already returned the money return was damage control. Now they're looking for ways to discredit you, or create counterclaims that might reduce their legal exposure. What should I do about the surveillance?
Document it, but don't confront them directly. If it escalates to harassment or trespassing, we can seek protective orders. For now, it's just more evidence of their ongoing bad faith behavior. Monday morning brought news that the Hayes family's problems were expanding beyond our personal conflict. Tiffany Rodriguez called before 9 a.m. "Victoria, you need to know what's happening over here. Hayes Construction just lost 2 more contracts, and George is talking about potential layoffs. What happened?" Word is spreading in the construction community about the legal issues and family problems. Clients are getting nervous about the company's stability and reliability. The Riverside Shopping Center project was canceled, and the Morrison residential development decided to go with a different contractor. How is Marcus handling it? Badly. He came in this morning shouting about how you're destroying the family business out of Rachel's been crying at her desk all morning. George locked himself in his office and hasn't come out. The irony was complete. Marcus had stolen money to solve his family's financial problems, and in doing so, he'd created financial problems that were far worse than anything they'd faced before. The Hayes family's reputation for integrity had been their most valuable business asset, and Marcus had traded it for $47,000 that he'd already been forced to return. "Tiffany, what's the mood in the office?" "Honestly, people are updating their resumes. No one wants to be associated with a company that's imploding due to family legal drama. The administrative staff is worried about job security, and the construction crews are hearing rumors from other contractors. Are you looking for new employment? I already have 2 interviews scheduled this week. Victoria, I've learned a lot watching how you've handled this situation. You've been strategic, professional, and principled throughout all the chaos. That's the kind of leadership I want to work for." After we hung up, I sat in my office thinking about unintended consequences. I'd never wanted to harm Hayes Construction or put innocent employees at risk. But the Hayes family's response to being caught stealing had created a pattern of lies and manipulations that was now threatening their business relationships. They'd had the opportunity to handle this quietly and professionally. Instead, they'd chosen public legal drama, family recruitment campaigns, and harassment tactics that had drawn attention to their ethical problems. The damage to their reputation was self-inflicted, even if the original theft had forced the situation into the open. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus.
The business is falling apart because of what you're doing. Innocent people are going to lose their jobs. Is your revenge worth destroying lives? I stared at the message for several minutes, feeling a complex mix of emotion, sadness that Marcus still couldn't see how his own actions had created this situation, frustration that he was trying to make me responsible for consequences I hadn't chosen, and anger that he thought concern for innocent people was appropriate now, when he'd shown no concern for his innocent wife when planning to steal from her. I replied, "The business is falling apart because you stole from your wife and your family," responded with lies and harassment instead of accountability and professionalism. Marcus responded immediately, "We returned the money. We apologized. What more do you want? I want you to understand that trust once broken has to be rebuilt through actions, not just words. I want you to accept that theft was wrong regardless of your motivations. And I want assurance that nothing like this will ever happen again." How can I give you assurance when you won't even talk to me without lawyers involved? You can give me assurance by signing the legal agreements that establish clear boundaries and consequences. You can give me assurance by acknowledging what you did without justification or excuse. You can give me assurance by demonstrating through your behavior that you understand why marriage means loyalty to your spouse above all others. Marcus didn't respond to that mess, probably because responding would have required him to acknowledge truths he wasn't ready to face about his own character and choices. The afternoon brought a call from Sandra Kim, the building manager at Riverside Heights. "Miss Hayes, I wanted to update you on the situation with Miss Catherine Hayes. She's been telling other tenants that you're illegally evicting her, and several residents have approached me expressing concern about landlord practices in the building." "What exactly is she telling them?" "She's claiming that you're her daughter-in-law who's evicting her out of spite over a family disagreement. She's saying that the legal papers were fabricated to intimidate her, and that you're violating fair housing laws by discriminating against elderly tenants." Catherine was now actively undermining my property management reputation among the other tenants. If residents began to believe I was an unethical landlord who used personal relationships to harass tenants, it could damage my business relationships throughout the building. "Sandra, I'll have my attorney send you official documentation of the legitimate grounds for Mrs. Hayes' notice to vacate. Please share that information with any residents who express concern. There's more. Miss Hayes has been leaving flyers under doors on her floor, asking for signatures on a petition to stop illegal eviction practices in the building. She's organizing tenant resistance. It appears the flyers claim you're violating her rights as a senior citizen, and that other tenants could be next if they don't stand up to landlord abuse." I thanked Sandra and immediately called James Morrison. "Catherine is now actively damaging my property management business," I reported. "She's spreading false information to other tenants and trying to organize resistance against building management. That's defamation and interference with business relationships," James said immediately. "We'll add it to our legal filing and seek an injunction preventing her from making false statements about your business practices." "Can she be evicted immediately for this behavior?" "Yes. Defaming the landlord and interfering with building operations are clear lease violations. We can accelerate the eviction timeline and seek removal within 7 days instead of 30. That evening, I received a call from Tiffany Rodriguez with an update that surprised me. "Victoria, I thought you should know that George Hayes called a family meeting tonight. Marcus, Catherine and Rachel were all required to attend." "How do you know about a family meeting?" "George asked me to stay late to finish some project documentation, and I overheard him on the phone with his wife explaining that he was laying down the law with the kid. He said, and I quote, 30 years of building this business, and they're going to destroy it over stolen money and lies." "Did you hear anything else?" "He told his wife that he was giving them one chance to handle this professionally and legally, or he was cutting them off financially and professionally. No more family employment, no more family financial support, no more protection from the consequences of their choices." George had apparently decided that protecting the family business was more important than protecting his family members from their own poor decisions. It was exactly the kind of accountability I'd hoped to see, but it was coming almost too late to matter. "Tiffany, what do you think will happen?" "Honestly, I think Catherine will refuse to cooperate. Rachel will try to find new manipulation tactics, and Marcus will be forced to choose between his wife and his mother." "And what choice do you think he'll make?" "Based on everything I've observed over the past week, I think Marcus will choose whatever option requires the least personal accountability and change." As I ended the call, I realized that the Hayes family crisis was reaching a critical decision point. George's ultimatum would force everyone to choose between continued manipulation and actual accountability. Catherine would have to decide whether eviction and legal consequences were preferable to admitting wrongdoing and changing her behavior. Marcus would have to decide whether his marriage was worth more than his role as his mother's enabler and defender, and I would have to decide whether any of their choices, however belated, could rebuild the trust that had been so completely shattered by theft, lies, and betrayal. The security cameras captured no unusual activity that night, but I found myself checking the monitors frequently, wondering what desperate measures the Hayes family might consider as their legal and financial problems continued to multiply. Sometimes the most dangerous moment in any conflict is when people realize they're going to lose. That's when rational actors make irrational decisions, when family loyalty transforms into family vengeance, and when the consequences of past mistakes expand into present danger. I'd protected my financial interests and documented my legal position carefully, but I was beginning to understand that the Hayes family's response to losing might be far more unpredictable and potentially destructive than their original theft had been. 6 months later, I stood in the spacious office of my expanded property management company, reviewing quarterly reports that showed remarkable growth. Hayes Property Investments now managed 18 rental units across Portland, with a waiting list of potential tenants and several investors interested in partnership opportunity. The business had thrived beyond my expectations, partly due to my enhanced focus after eliminating the distractions of a dysfunctional marriage. The divorce had been finalized 2 months ago. Marcus had eventually signed the papers after George Hayes made it clear that continued employment at Hayes Construction depended on resolving the legal issues professionally. The post-nuptial agreement I'd insisted on had made the property division straightforward. I kept everything I'd acquired independently, Marcus kept his share of jointly acquired assets, and we each walked away responsible only for our own debt. Catherine had been evicted from Riverside Heights after refusing to sign a market-rate lease or cease her defamation campaign against my property management practices. The accelerated eviction process had taken only 10 days once James Morrison documented her interference with building operations and harassment of other tenants. She'd found a studio apartment and a senior living complex in Beaverton, funded by what remained of the money she'd received from the original theft and a part-time job at a local grocery store. The change in Catherine's circumstances had been dramatic but not tragic. The senior living complex provided meals, activities, and social interaction, while the part-time employment gave her structure and purpose she'd lacked during her years of comfortable manipulation. Several family members had told me she seemed healthier and more engaged with life, though she still maintained that I'd been unnecessarily harsh in my response to what she called a family misunderstanding. Rachel had left Hayes Construction after George discovered she'd been sharing confidential client information with competitors, hoping to damage the company's reputation enough to force me to drop the legal proceeding. Her plan had backfired spectacularly when the competitors reported her unethical behavior to industry associations, making her unemployable in Portland's construction and marketing sector. She'd moved to Seattle to start fresh, taking a significant pay cut and leaving behind the network of professional relationships she'd spent years building. Hayes Construction had survived the crisis but barely. George had been forced to sell the company to a larger firm to avoid bankruptcy, staying on as a senior consultant while the new owners rebuilt the damaged reputation. The sale had provided enough capital to cover outstanding debts and employee severance packages, but the Hayes family's 3 decades of business ownership had ended. Marcus had found employment with a smaller construction company at a junior level, earning about half his previous salary. The professional consequences of his actions had been severe and lasting, as the construction industry in Portland was small enough that everyone eventually learned about his role in the family's legal problem. He'd moved into a modest apartment and was reportedly seeing a therapist, though whether that represented genuine personal growth or another attempt to manipulate perceptions remained unclear. The most interesting development had come from an unexpected source. Tiffany Rodriguez had joined my property management company as operations manager, bringing with her several former Hayes Construction employees who'd been impressed by my handling of the crisis. The team we'd assembled was skilled, ethical, and focused on building something positive rather than protecting dysfunctional family dynamics. "Victoria, the Burnside property inspection is complete," Tiffany reported, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Everything looks excellent. The new tenants should be very happy there. Any issues with the transition?" "None at all. Mrs. Patterson was actually thanking us for how smoothly everything went." She said she'd never had a landlord who was so professional and responsive. I smiled, remembering how different this felt from the drama and manipulation that had characterized my relationships with the Hayes family. Professional relationships built on mutual respect and clear expectations were so much more satisfying than personal relationships built on lies and exploitation. Tiffany, I've been thinking about expansion again. There's a small apartment complex in Southeast that might be coming on the market soon. The Morrison Building on Division, that's the one. 12 units, good neighborhood, needs some updating but has strong long-term potential. Tiffany pulled out her tablet and started taking notes. What kind of timeline are we looking at? Preliminary discussions with the current owner start next week. If the numbers work, we could close within 60 days. I'll start researching contractors and getting renovation estimates. As Tiffany left to begin her research, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed since that morning, when I discovered our savings account had been empty. The woman who'd stood in her kitchen holding a bank statement and trembling with shock had evolved into someone who confidently managed multiple properties, led a growing team, and made strategic business decisions without fear or self-doubt. The transformation hadn't been easy. The divorce process had forced me to examine my own role in the dysfunctional patterns that had developed over 7 years of marriage. I'd enabled Marcus's financial irresponsibility by quietly covering his shortfall. I'd accepted Catherine's subtle manipulations because confrontation felt uncomfortable. I'd prioritized family harmony over personal boundaries, creating an environment where theft could seem reasonable to people who'd lost sight of basic ethical standards. But I'd also discovered strengths I hadn't known I possessed. Strategic thinking under pressure, the ability to build and lead effective teams, confidence in my own judgment, even when facing intense social pressure to compromise, the willingness to enforce consequences, even when doing so was emotionally difficult. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Victoria, this is Eleanor Hayes. I was wondering if we could meet for coffee sometime. I'd like to apologize for my family's behavior and see how you're doing. Eleanor had been the one member of the Hayes family I genuinely respected, and her participation in the manipulation campaign had been particularly disappointing. But her text suggested a level of accountability I hadn't seen from other family members. I replied I'd be willing to meet, but only if the conversation is about moving forward, not about revisiting the past or mediating family relationships. Her response came quickly. Understood. I'm not trying to fix anything or ask for anything. I just want to acknowledge what happened and wish you well. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop in the Pearl District the following week. I was curious about what Eleanor had learned from watching her family's crisis unfold, and whether her perspective had evolved beyond the loyalty above all approach she'd initially advocated. The afternoon brought a call from James Morrison with an update I hadn't expected. Victoria, I received an interesting contact today. Marcus's attorney called asking about the possibility of reconciliation counseling. Reconciliation counseling. The divorce was finalized 2 months ago. Apparently Marcus has been in individual therapy and believes he's made significant personal growth. He's hoping you might be willing to consider whether the marriage could be rebuilt. I walked to my office window, looking out at the city where I'd built a new life while my former husband struggled to rebuild his reputation and relationships. The idea of reconciliation felt surreal, like a proposal from a completely different lifetime. James, what exactly is Marcus proposing? Full accountability for his actions, ongoing therapy, complete transparency about finances, and a structured process for rebuilding trust over time. His attorney says he's prepared to sign any agreements necessary to demonstrate his commitment to change. And what's your professional opinion? My professional opinion is that people can change, but fundamental character issues rarely transform completely. Marcus stole from you when he felt pressured by family loyalty and financial stress. Those pressures will exist again in different forms throughout life. What would you recommend if I were considering this? Extreme caution, extended individual therapy for both parties, couples therapy with someone who specializes in betrayal recovery, binding legal agreements about financial transparency and decision-making, and a very long timeline for rebuilding trust before making any permanent commitments. And if I'm not considering it, then a polite but firm decline, with clear boundaries about future contact. I thanked James and spent the rest of the afternoon thinking about Marcus's proposal. 7 years of marriage deserved serious consideration, even after everything that had happened. But I also had to be honest about what I'd learned about both Marcus and myself during the crisis. Marcus had revealed himself to be someone who, under pressure, would choose family manipulation over marital loyalty, someone who would steal rather than have difficult conversations, someone who would lie about medical emergencies rather than acknowledge financial irresponsibility. Those weren't temporary lapses in judgment. They were fundamental character traits that therapy might modify but probably couldn't eliminate. I had revealed myself to be someone who was stronger, more capable, and more independent than I'd realized. Someone who could build a successful business, lead an effective team, and handle complex legal and financial challenges with competence and grace. Someone who didn't need to be married to feel complete or secure. The relationship I had with myself now was healthier than the relationship I'd had with Marcus even before the theft. I respected my own judgment, trusted my own instincts, and felt confident in my ability to handle whatever challenges life might present. Returning to a marriage that had been built on my acceptance of dysfunction didn't seem like progress, regardless of Marcus's promises to change. That evening, I met my friend Laura for dinner at a new restaurant in the Alberta district. She'd been my closest support throughout the crisis, providing both practical advice and emotional encouragement when the legal and family pressures had felt overwhelming. "You look amazing," Laura observed as we settled into our table. "I mean, you always look good, but there's something different about you lately. More confident, more settled. I feel different, more like myself, if that makes sense." "It makes perfect sense. You've been living your authentic life instead of trying to manage other people's dysfunction." Our server approached to take drink orders, and I found myself appreciating the simple pleasure of making choices based entirely on my own preferences. Red wine instead of beer because Marcus didn't like wine. The salmon instead of chicken because I wasn't considering anyone else's dietary restrictions. Small decisions, but symbolic of a larger freedom I'd gained. "Laura, I got an interesting call today. Marcus wants to try reconciliation counseling." "Seriously, after everything that happened?" "His attorney says he's been in therapy and made significant personal growth. He's hoping we might be able to rebuild the marriage." Laura paused with her water glass halfway to her lips. "What do you think?" "I think 6 months ago I would have been tempted to try." The idea of saving 7 years of marriage, giving him credit for seeking therapy, believing that people can change. And now I realize that I don't want to go back to being the person I was in that marriage. Even if Marcus has changed completely, which seems unlikely, I've changed too. I've become someone who expects honesty, demands respect, and won't compromise my financial security for anyone else's comfort. That sounds like a healthy evolution. It feels healthy, but it also means that even the best version of Marcus might not be compatible with who I am now. We ordered our meals and spent the next hour discussing my business expansion plans, Laura's new job prospects, and mutual friends' relationship developments. Normal topics for two successful women, building lives they actually wanted to live. As dinner concluded, Laura asked the question I'd been avoiding. "So what are you going to tell Marcus about the reconciliation counseling?" "I'm going to thank him for the offer, wish him well with his personal growth, and make it clear that I'm moving forward with my life as a single person." "Any regrets about that decision?" I considered the question seriously. 7 years of marriage ending in divorce always involved some regrets, even when the divorce was necessary and beneficial. I regret that Marcus wasn't the person I thought he was. I regret that his family's dysfunction was worse than I realized. I regret that it took theft and lies to wake me up to problems that had probably been building for years. But do you regret choosing to end the marriage instead of trying to rebuild it? No. The woman who married Marcus might have tried to rebuild it, but she was someone who accepted dysfunction as normal. The woman I am now deserves better. The following week, I met Eleanor Hayes at the coffee shop as planned. She looked older than I remembered, with new lines around her eyes and a more subdued demeanor than the confident matriarch who'd visited my house months earlier. "Victoria, thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I wasn't sure you would. I'm curious about what you wanted to discuss." Eleanor ordered a black coffee and settled into her chair with visible fatigue. "I wanted to apologize for my role in what happened, not just the theft, which I knew nothing about until after it occurred, but for my response when you were trying to deal with the consequences." "What specifically do you want to apologize for?" "For assuming you were being vindictive instead of trying to understand why you felt betrayed. For prioritizing family loyalty over justice and accountability. For asking you to compromise your principles to protect people who had violated yours." The acknowledgement was more comprehensive than I'd expected. Eleanor was addressing the fundamental philosophical differences that had made our previous conversation so frustrating. "What changed your perspective?" "Watching what happened to Marcus and Rachel and Catherine over the past 6 months. The business consequences, the professional reputation damage, the personal relationship destruction. I realized that everything you predicted would happen has happened, and it happened because they refused to accept responsibility for their actions. Eleanor sipped her coffee and looked out the window at the busy street. I've been thinking about what I would have done differently if I could go back to that morning in your living room. And what would you have done differently? I would have told Catherine that stealing from family was unacceptable and that she needed to face whatever consequences her actions had created. I would have told Marcus that marriage means loyalty to your spouse above all others, and that he had violated the most basic commitment he'd made to you. Why didn't you say those things at the time? Because I was more concerned with keeping the family together than with doing what was. I thought family harmony was more important than individual accountability. Eleanor's honesty was refreshing, but it also highlighted how different our fundamental values had always been. She valued family unity above individual rights. I valued personal integrity above group loyalty. Those weren't differences that could be easily reconciled, even with better communication. Eleanor, I appreciate your apology, but you should know that even if you'd handled things differently, I'm not sure it would have changed the outcome. The problems in my marriage ran deeper than the theft itself. I suspected as much. Marcus has always been easily influenced by whoever exerts the most pressure, and Catherine has always been willing to use manipulation to get what she wants. Those traits didn't develop overnight. They were probably present throughout the marriage, but I was too trusting to see them clearly. And now you see them clearly. Now I see them clearly. And I've built a life that doesn't depend on other people's character flaws being manageable. Eleanor finished her coffee and prepared to leave. Victoria, I know this doesn't change anything, but I want you to know that I'm proud of how you handled this situation. You showed more strength and integrity than anyone else in the family, and you did it while facing enormous pressure to compromise your principles. Thank you. That means something coming from you. You deserved better from all of us. I hope you find the happiness and peace you deserve in your new life. After Eleanor left, I sat in the coffee shop for a few more minutes, reflecting on how satisfying it felt to receive genuine accountability from someone I'd respect. Her apology didn't change the past, but it validated my response to the crisis and confirmed that my insistence on consequences had been appropriate. 2 weeks later, I sent a brief email to Marcus through his attorney, declining the reconciliation counseling and wishing him well with his personal growth. The response was polite and respectful, acknowledging my decision without argument or manipulation. Perhaps therapy had helped him understand that accepting other people's choices was part of genuine accountability. My business continued to grow, my team continued to excel, and my personal life continued to evolve in directions I found satisfying and meaningful. I dated occasionally, but without urgency or desperation. I traveled more, invested in hobbies I'd neglected during marriage, and built friendships with people who shared my values around honesty and mutual respect. The crisis that had begun with a missing $47,000 had ultimately cost the Hayes family much more than money. It had cost them their business, their reputation, their family unity, and their relationships with someone who had been genuinely invested in their success and happiness. But for me, the crisis had been transformational in the best possible way. I'd discovered inner strength I hadn't known I possessed. I'd built a successful business from skills I'd been underutilizing. I'd learned to trust my own judgment even when facing intense social pressure. Most importantly, I'd learned the difference between being generous and being manipulated, between keeping the peace and enabling dysfunction. Sometimes the worst betrayals become the foundation for the best transformation. The Hayes family had taught me exactly who I could become when I stopped accepting less than I deserved. The lesson had been expensive for them, and painful for everyone involved, but it had also been necessary. I was grateful for the education, even as I was grateful to have moved beyond the need for it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.